We're doing Parshas Chukas for the recording, and we are starting with chapter 20, verse 14. It's the beginning of Rabbi in the sequence of calling people to the Torah. So we're not starting at the beginning. It's interesting. This week's Parsha has two prominent or dominant passages. The first is the Para Aduma, which takes up quite a lot of space at the beginning of the Parsha, the famous Chok of the Torah, the statute, the ordinance, the decree of the Torah, about which much has been written. And the other, of course, main event is Moshe's downfall with Mei Meriva. I'd like to look tonight, though, at one of the less prominent short episodes described in the Parsha, and I think hopefully we shall see that it is connected in the thought of Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschutz. It is also connected to the downfall of Moshe, and he proposes a quite novel explanation for that. I hope I've piqued your curiosity a bit, so let's get underway. So it's chapter 20, verse 14. Vaishlach Moshe malachim mikadesh el melech Edom. Moshe sent malachim, probably here does not mean angels, it means emissaries, and the word is often used for emissary or agent. Excuse me. Moshe sent emissaries, Mikadesh, that's the place where they were situated at that time, El Melech Edom, to the king of Edom, with the following message. Ko amar achicha Yisrael, so says, or thus says your brother Israel, Ataya da'ata as kol ha'tila asher matza'asnu. You know about all of the travail that has overcome us or has greeted us, has befallen us, maybe is the right way to translate. But our fathers, meaning our ancestors, went down to Egypt. Rabbi, we stayed there a long time, much longer than we had expected. And the Egyptians mistreated us and to our fathers as well. He goes on to say, we called out to Hashem, he answered us, and now we are poised on your border. And what's the whole point of this little history lesson? We would like to cross over your land. We won't disturb you. We just stay on the highway. We want to go straight across Edom into the land of Israel. That's our destiny and that's our destination. That's our purpose. By the way, we won't disrupt you in any way. We'll pay if need be. We'll enrich the local economy as well. Okay, as we know, Edom does not allow the Jewish people to pass through. He says the answer is no. They repeat the request further, and he responds once more in verse 20. Lo ta'avor, do not cross. He went out to greet them. Edom went to greet the Jewish people with a strong army and with a powerful yad chazaka, like powerful armaments. And the Torah summarizes, Edom noson es Yisrael avar bigvulo. Edom declined or refused to allow the Jewish people, and the Jewish people had to go another way. They had to perform a circumlocution in order to get around to avoid the land of Edom, because they had no right of passage through the land of Edom. It's a bit like El Al and the Jordanian airspace. I think they may let them through now, actually, on the way to Dubai. Actually, hopefully tonight we'll have a chance to reflect briefly on that as well. So bear that little thought in mind. Okay, so this is the background. What does Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschutz say? So I want to begin by sharing two questions he asks. Firstly, why does it say Vishlach Moshe Malachim? Moshe sent the emissaries. Why not say the Jewish people sent? Why attribute it to Moshe specifically? What's interesting is that later on in chapter 21, Pasuk 21, in chapter 21, verse 21, we have a kind of similar sequence in which the Jewish people now would like to cross through the land of Sichon. Take a look in verse 21, same chapter, 21. Vaishlach Yisrael Malachim. Now the Jewish people collectively send these emissaries. El Sichon Melach Amori Lemor, Ebra Ba'artzecha, Lo Niteba Sadeh, V'cherem Lo Nishteh, etc., Lo Nishteh Mei Be'er, etc., very similar to the request for Edom. Sichon also did not allow them to. And actually, take a look closely because it's going to be relevant in verse 23. That whereas Edom just greeted Israel with a show of force, Sichon went further. He actually waged war. But it did not end well for Sichon. In verse 24, Israel defeated Sichon by the edge of the sword, V'yirashes artso, and they vanquished him, and actually they settled in their land. Ma'adoni al Yavok ad b'nei Ammon ki az gvul b'nei Ammon, etc. The Jewish people occupied the land of Sichon to the victory of the spoils, and we find actually that Sichon was part of Canaan, and the Jewish people were successful in conquering Sichon, and ultimately they settled in that land. We find later on that they settled in that land. The tribes of Gad and Reuben wanted the remainder, and so they did. First question he asks is, why did Moshe send these emissaries? And later on, it says that Israel collectively sent the emissaries, which is the norm. We would expect that, of course, it may be that Moshe is the leader, but why say that Moshe sent them? He sent on behalf of Israel. But he asks a further question, which I like very much because it never occurred to me quite in this terms. Why does Israel say, Klamar Achicha Yisrael, so says your brother? Are they brothers? Yisrael and Edom, are they brothers? Yes, they are brothers, because Edom is Esav. That's not just a rabbinic tradition. The Torah says clearly that Edom is Esav. Edom are the descendants of Esav. So they are brothers, or they're cousins. Esav was a brother to Israel. So we're talking generations later, but they're like brothers. So why does Israel refer to the brotherhood? Well, the answer is they are appealing for a favor, essentially. And they present themselves as kind of like Nebuch. We were oppressed in Egypt. We are just redeemed by God. And we want to finally make our way to the land of Israel after all those years of persecution and all of that. It's obsequious. They're like appealing. They're saying, please, pretty please, the sugar on top, let us through. Now, again, on the surface, this is the way of diplomacy. But Rabbi Eibeschutz poses it as a question. Why did they adopt this kind of pleading, obsequious posture? It's got an explanation for it. He says that the Jewish people collectively did not send these emissaries to Edom. Can we take a shortcut through your land to get to the land of Israel? Because as a result of the Chet Meriva, which had just happened, because of the sin of Moshe with the rock, Hashem said explicitly, it's been hinted to in the past, but it's explicit in the Torah, Moshe and Aaron are not going to enter the land of Israel, they're going to die in the wilderness. If that's the case, the shortcut through Edom means they're going to hasten their arrival to the land of Israel, and they are going to hasten, therefore, the death of Moshe. So the Jewish people actually felt it would be bad form for them to look for a shortcut to get to the land of Israel as quickly as they can. It's as if they're eager to bring about the demise of Moshe. Therefore, they didn't do it. But Moshe, for him, the fulfillment of the divine promise to Abraham, that this land I'm giving to your descendants, the realization of the divine promise to take them to the land of milk and honey was more important and more precious to Moshe than his own life. And therefore, Moshe did not hesitate. The Jewish people were not looking to expedite it, but Moshe was prepared to do so for the benefit of the Jewish people. By the way, this idea is found in Rashi later on, when with the Milchemes Midian, the war against Midian, again, Hashem said, your life is dependent on, meaning the war of Midian hastens the death of Moshe. Nevertheless, he sought to fulfill the divine command. Rabbi Yonatan says the same idea here as well. But there's more. Because he was aware, also, the Jewish people were aware that they knew that this king of Edom is no friend of theirs, despite the family relationship. They know that he is unhelpful. He's got no interest in doing a favor to the Jewish people. So they knew that he would not allow them through anyway. So the Jewish people thought, why should we send and ask and plead? And he says, get out of here. So, but Moshe was a step ahead. Moshe was shrewd, and this is the brilliance and originality of Rabbi Eibeschutz. The Jewish people also were aware that they were prevented from waging war against Edom. because although Edom may not value the kinship, but Hashem said to the Jewish people, do not wage war against Edom, because you're not going to conquer their land. I'm not giving you their land. I've given the land of Edom to the descendants of Esau. You're not allowed to start up with them. So therefore, the Jewish people, what's the point? We'll ask him to go through. He won't let us. We can't start up with him anyway. We've got no choice but to go around. But Sichon is part of the land of Israel, and the Jewish people, part of the land of Canaan, and the Jewish people wanted to conquer Sichon because it was part of the divine destiny, and the promise of the land of Canaan included the land of Sichon. But they had to initially present Sichon with the option of a peaceful arrangement. They didn't have the right, we'll see why in just one moment, to wage war against Sichon. So therefore, it suited them to kind of encourage in a subtle way Sichon to go to war with them. If Sichon wages war against the Jewish people, then of course they're allowed to fight back, and exactly what they did, as we've seen already later on, starting with verse 21. So therefore, and how did Moshe know that he can't just wage war against Sichon? How did he know that he has to first propose a peaceable arrangement with Sichon, and only if they spurn that opening, then they have the right to fight back? Because, and again, this is part of the brilliance of Yonatan and Eibeschutz, Moshe learned that important and bitter lesson from his own downfall. And here is a novel approach to the Chet Mei Meriva. So it's very well known, Rashi's opinion, that the sin of Moshe was in striking the rock. If most people, if you ask them, and that is what Rashi says, and certainly Rashi's commentary is deservedly well known. But as we'll see on Shabbos, for those who are coming to the Torah on Shabbos, rock my world, Moshe's downfall, there are good grounds to question Rashi's explanation. But Yonatan Eibeschutz says something slightly different. He says, yes, Moshe struck the rock, but Hashem told him, Kaches Hamatet. Take a look at verse 8, just a few verses before in our same chapter. Hashem said to Moshe, the people said, we need water. So Hashem said to Moshe, look at verse 8, Pasuk Ches, Kaches Hamatet v'hakeles ha'ida ata v'Aaron, etc. Take the staff and speak to the rock. So Moshe thought, what am I supposed to do with this staff if not hit the rock? So he did hit the rock. Says Yonatan Eibeschutz, yes, Moshe had the authority, he had the permission to strike the rock. But if you want someone to do something for you, first you ask in a nice way. You ask in a diplomatic way. You ask in an amicable way, in an affable way, in a diplomatic way, in a polite way. First you ask. Then, if you don't get what you want, especially maybe this is someone who is, I don't know, an employee or something, then you can use more forceful means if you need to. But don't start with force. That was his sin. Says Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschutz, Moshe violated a principle of derech eretz, of courtesy. If you like, it's more than courtesy, of principle of interpersonal relations. He might say it doesn't apply to rocks, but that's what he suggests. Moshe should have first spoken to the rock, which Hashem said, Moshe dispensed with speaking to the rock, he just hit it. Says Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschutz, Moshe Rabbeinu, having learned this lesson, he thought, you know what? I want to start up with Edom, or rather, I'm not allowed to start up with Edom. I've got a plan. I will propose to Edom in a very obsequious way, in a very servile way. Please, please, please let me through. We're such good brothers. Don't you remember generations ago, Yaakov and Esau? You remember me? Yeah. So Moshe knew that Edom would not allow, but he thought in this way, Sichon also will not allow us through. Because Sichon would say, if Edom, who are weaker than us, won't let them through because they're so wimpy, the Jewish people, I'm certainly not going to either. But he says more. There's a possibility that Sichon would think to himself, you know what, these Jewish people, they may not be the strongest warriors, but God is on their side. They left Egypt a shambles behind them. Hashem enabled them to leave with their heads held high, even though they've been wandering in the desert for a long time, but now they're coming my way. I better be careful and let them through. And if Sichon had allowed them, Moshe would have had no pretense to fight with Sichon. But Moshe was looking for such a pretense. So therefore, by giving the example of Edom, who refused them entry, and the Jewish people had to make a long way around, they had to make a detour because of that. So Sichon was lured into the battle. Sichon thought the Jewish people are so wimpy. They're pleading for a favor from Edom, and Edom wouldn't do them the favor. I'm sure not going to do them a favor either. So therefore, Sichon came to greet the Jewish people with war. And as a result, the Jewish people were able to fight back and conquer Sichon, conquer his land, and settle in the land as well. It's interesting. Whether you can see a kind of precedent for this, for the 6-day war, preemptive strike, I don't know. I'm not a military analyst, nor is Yonatan, I'm sure. But this is his suggestion. He says, yes, the Jewish people have to first engage in diplomacy. You might call it soft power. And after that, if it doesn't work, gunboat diplomacy. That's what they did here. So that's why Moshe was shrewder than the Jewish people. Moshe was a step ahead. Moshe is the one who sent malachim, emissaries to Edom. Edom refused. And therefore, as a result, Sichon thought, I'm going to do exactly the same. And as a consequence, Sichon was waged war against the Jewish people and was defeated in battle. Okay, this is what Rabbi Yonatan says, and as I said, Derech Hagav, he also sheds new light on the Chet Meimariv. According to him, the Chet of Moshe was that he struck the rock without speaking to it first. The Derech Eretz is to first speak, first use words of, as I said, diplomacy, polite words, and if you don't get the results, then you can go on to stronger action if the circumstances require it. On a different note, he says something very interesting about Komar Achicha Yisrael. So let's take another look at the same pasuk, verse 14, but from a different point of view. Komar Achicha Yisrael. So he asks, why do they say Achicha Yisrael? Why not say Achicha Yaakov? Because if we're talking about brotherhood, if we're talking about hearkening back to the patriarch of these two nations, the patriarch, that is to say, the original ancestor, the one who was the brother of Esav, is called Yaakov. It's true, his name became Yisrael. Why do they say, however, Kol Achicha Yaakov? So he suggests two different ideas. One is the Jewish people are demonstrating here good midos, because it is sometimes the case. You've got two brothers, and they're both born into whatever kind of family it may be, and one of them achieves greatness, prestige, power, influence, wealth, and all of that. The other one does not. So it's often the case that when they're, in university, or they're pursuing their careers in the early stages and they're simmering there, then they're good friends. They're brothers. But once one of them, as Allah the Gedula, becomes powerful and rich, it's often the case that he doesn't have the same affection, doesn't show the same brotherly love to the other guy, because it's beneath him. When he needs him, yeah, he's a friend to him. But now that he's high and mighty, he doesn't show the same brotherhood. So that's why the Jewish people were emphasizing that. The name Yisrael refers to Kisarisa im Elokim Aneshima Tuchal. You have struggled with man and with God, or with God and with man, and you have prevailed. The name Yisrael is from the word Sar. The name Yaakov is from the word Akev, holding on to the heel. So Yaakov is a name of humility. Yisrael is the name of aristocracy. So therefore he says, that's what the Jewish people say, even though we're now Yisrael, but we still have brotherly love. We still feel affectionate towards you. We don't look down on you and just because we become Israel. Then he says another idea as well, which is completely different. He says maybe the Jewish people were reluctant or were cautious about were reticent, we could say, to use the name Yaakov, because they don't want to remind Edom of what Esav said all of those years, generations ago. Achen karashmo Yaakov, It's apt that they named him Yaakov because he has like deceived me twice. He took my birthright. He took my birthright. He took my blessings. So the name Yaakov for Edom, the name Yaakov recalls the anger and the resentment, the antagonism of Esau towards his brother. So therefore, the name Yaakov is best not to recall. Therefore, they say Yisrael. They don't remind Edom that the name of our ancestor originally was Yaakov. So two different angles as to why perhaps it says specifically Kol Achicha Yisrael rather than Achicha Yaakov. Then he says something else, which is again more subtle, and I like it very much. Our fathers went down to Egypt. That's in the next pasuk, pasuk Tesva 15. We went down to Egypt. So why mention we went down to Egypt? Of course, if they lived together when they were brothers generations ago. They lived together in Canaan. And if they said, we were in Egypt, why do they have to say we went down to Egypt? What's the significance of saying our fathers went down there? Because we went down to Egypt. What's the significance of Mitzrayim? So it hints to the fact, or it could have just begun in the middle of that verse. Rabbi, we stayed in Egypt. We were in Egypt for a long time. Why bother to also say we went down to Egypt? Our fathers went down to Egypt. Rabbi and I should suggest that they were alluding to the way they went down to Egypt, how it came about that they ended up in Egypt. How did our family, our ancestors, our father Yaakov and his sons, some grandchildren as well, how did it come about that they went down to Egypt? The answer, as we know, of course, is through Yosef, through the antagonism towards Yosef, to the strife, to the fraternal unrest within the family, because the brothers betrayed Yosef. So therefore, they are hinting to Edom. This is an appeal to Achva, an appeal to brotherly love. So they're reminding Edom, how did we ever get to Egypt in the first place? It's only because we didn't have the brotherly love within our family. So he's hinting, the Jewish people are hinting, don't arouse divine, let's say, disfavor or anger or invite divine punishment because of the conflict within the family, because of the breakdown of brotherly relations. It may be a hint to that. But then he says another possibility as well, according to what we said before, that Moshe actually is deliberately, although superficially he's appealing with all diplomatic, courtesy and trying his best to persuade Edom to let them through. That's on the surface. But we said that actually beneath the surface, Moshe anticipates and actually expects and wants Edom to refuse them. So it could be, and he shows a few other ways about this as well. Rabbi actually says he's actually hinting to a good excuse to Edom not to let them through by saying, well, our fathers went down to Mitzrayim, which, as we know, was because of the hatred of the brothers. So Edom was saying, you know what, you've given me a good reason. Because you betrayed your brother, so we're not going to let you through either. You deserve to suffer. Just like God punished you the first time around, you had to go down to Egypt because of it. So it's our turn to punish you as well. It's almost like giving them an excuse to refuse the request. Actually, I was thinking about he said another suggestion as well, that if with regard to the other observation about the name Yisrael, that the name Yaakov could have meant that Edom would say, perhaps you, the Jewish people, are going to try to deceive us again. We'll let you through the land. We'll let you in. If we let you in, then you're going to act against us as well. So it could be, again, they were hinting, Moshe was hinting to Edom by referring to our fathers went down to Egypt, which was the result of the hostility to Yosef and the strife within the family. So actually, Moshe was consciously but very subtly giving Edom an excuse to not let them through, which, as we've said, was Moshe's intention in order to lure Sichon into the battlefield later on. I'd like to end on a more optimistic note. In this verse 15, Vaneshev Mitzrayim Yamim Rabim, we stayed in Egypt a long time. Vayareyu lanu Mitzrayim v'la avosenu, and the Egyptians act wickedly towards us and to our fathers. I'll read it again. Vayareyu lanu Mitzrayim v'la avosenu. Now, why does it mention us first and then our fathers? You know what we say in the Haggadah, V'hisha amda lavosenu velanu. If we're looking back in history, the fathers came before us chronologically. These events that are described, it says, Vayerdu avosenu Mitzrayim, our fathers went down to Egypt. So they should say the Egyptians mistreated our fathers and us. That's true. The very first generation they went to Egypt were not mistreated, but the subsequent generations were. So we, the speakers, are only the last chapter in the wickedness and in the villainy and in the mistreatment of the Egyptians. Says Yonatan, it's a beautiful idea. It is not a reference to our fathers or our grandfathers or our great-grandfathers, all of whom were enslaved in Egypt. It's not what it refers to. They mistreated us. And you know who else suffered? It doesn't mean our ancestors in Egypt. It means our ancestors, Yitzchak and Abraham. Because remember, these malachim, these emissaries are speaking to Edom. The Jewish people say, Edom, you're my brother. So says Israel, your brother. We are brothers. We have a common father. Our common father is Yitzchak, the father of Yaakov and Esau. We have a grandfather, Abraham. You know, Yitzchak and Abraham were also distressed because when we, the Jewish people, were in Egypt, and we were oppressed, and we were brutalized, and we were enslaved. So it was distressing to our fathers who were looking down from Shemayim, so to speak, because they had been promised that their ancestors would receive a great inheritance, and they'd suffer along the way, and the suffering was going on and on. In other words, this is an appeal to their Edom's common bond with the Jewish people of our fathers. So therefore, because our fathers suffered, so let us through your land so that we can fulfill our destiny. We can realize the promise to our shared fathers, Yitzchak and Abraham, to let us into the land of Canaan, which is our destiny. I think there's an optimistic note because to me, this is an echo of the Abraham Accord as well. The idea that although there is, unfortunately, antagonism, hostility, even hatred towards the Jewish people, hopefully it's not reciprocated by the Jewish people vis-a-vis the nations of the world, but we do have common ancestry. And the Abraham Accord is an effort, and I'm not here to be a cheerleader for it. We heard that from Mark Maurice already. But the Abraham Accords, I think, is a hopeful sign. It deliberately evokes the shared ancestry, the shared values of the Jewish people and the sons of Abraham Avinu, which is Ishmael and others. And here we have that idea with vis-a-vis Edom. Now, Edom is associated with Rome, with the Christian church as well. I'm not into ecumenicism, but in any case, this note, by the way, he was a bit into ecumenicism, but we'll say that for another time. But anyway, this is a hopeful note, and I see this as a kind of precursor, an ancient precursor to the Abraham Accord, Lanu v'la avosenu, addressing Edom, our fathers, Yitzchak and Abraham. They were distressed when we were enslaved in Egypt. They are waiting for the fulfillment of the promise that we'll inherit the land. Edom, you got your land. We want to go to our land, the land of Israel, the land promised to Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov And with this, we'll conclude this year. Thank you for listening. And I hope that, like me, you've enjoyed learning some imaginative, creative, original thoughts from my friend for the year, Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschutz. If there's any questions or comments, happy to entertain them. And I wish everybody Shabbat Shalom. Have a wonderful Shabbos.
Shabbat Shalom. Thank you.
Good job.